All right, everybody, let's get started. I mean, we're 5 minutes in. How's everyone doing? Kat, I see you're a little back and forth. Yeah, I know. It's almost Friday, so everybody just hang in there, okay? All right, so hopefully you've come to the right place. So tonight we're going to be talking about beyond high school, transitioning into adulthood. So my name is Kylie Regan also, and I'm a Hudson Valley Family Support Specialist. I also am an adult adoptee. I was adopted from Russia at 22 months, and I also co-lead the youth programming here at AFFCNY. So we have a teen adoptee group, and then also an Express Yourself creative group. So it's fantastic. So I really get to work with everybody. And through my work with kids, and then also receiving a lot of emails from parents, I realized how little, I think there's just not enough information out there about how to support kids in general when they're navigating this major life transition. And then specifically now looking at, right, the kids that, your kids, and then also the kids that, we work with, kids who have experienced significant loss and separation quite early in their lives. And so what I really wanted to come and talk to you all about today is this topic, but more so from an emotional standpoint. Most of my staff knows that I've sent out, resources for scholarships and financial aid and programs specifically, that are aimed at providing adoptees, foster youth, and guardianship youth as well with support. So while I'm going to be talking about some of that and answering any questions you might have about that towards the end, and I can link our website with that, I thought maybe we'd be talking about the emotional aspect and what you can do as parents, and then also if there are professionals in the room, what you can do to support the families that you work with. So let me know if for some reason my slideshow isn't working, but I'm hoping it will be. Okay. So I like structure, so I'm giving you all my overview. So we're going to talk about graduation grief and post-graduation depression. We will talk about the individual life experiences of our kids or the kids that we work with, and how this might intersect with the grief and loss of of their high school experience. We'll then talk about how your own experiences of your high school graduation, or just your high school experience, and then what came after that, whether it be college, armed forces, kind of jumping right into career, whatever that might be, and how those experiences might impact your perspective. And then we'll address the difference, and I think this is really important. We're going to talk about and give you actual tools that you can use when you're talking to your child or helping a family talk to their child about this major life transition. And so we're going to focus more on the concept and the term interdependence instead of independence, which we often think of as, that's kind of one of the go-to words when we're thinking about, heading off to whatever comes next, right, after graduation, and talking about how you can be right, like how can you be present for your child while supporting their need for autonomy? So really balancing that. And it's always tricky with teens, right? There's a lot of emotion and a lot of conflict constantly going on. So how can you best support your young person? So, and then we'll talk about any specific resources or supports that you might be looking for. And I'm always happy to answer any questions. I'll drop my email in the chat. So if you have specific questions afterwards, feel free to let me know. Okay, so we're jumping right into graduation grief and post-graduation depression. And then also, I forgot to mention this at the beginning, but if anybody has any questions they want to ask, feel free to pop them in the chat, or this is informal, so please feel free to unmute and ask them. So when we think of graduation, right, we all, we can picture those, coming of age movies. We can picture, perhaps we can picture kind of our own experiences of graduation, and whether, I think of, the Hallmark cards and everything that you see, and they all have these fantastic, quotes, a couple of them here, right? Today is the beginning of the rest of your life. You're leaving the nest, spread your wings and fly. The sky's the limit. The world is your oyster, et cetera, right? But when you're in it, and I'm sure a lot of you can remember and, and connect with those emotions that you might have been feeling at that time, at that big transition, right? So perhaps today is the beginning of the rest of your life. While how nice and the meaning of it, what that also can bring up is a sense of dread, and an acknowledgement that everything is changing. All of the things that you found so comfortable and so safe and so consistent, is changing. So you're leaving the nest, you're spreading your wings and flying. Okay, well, you're on your own now. And then, right, the sky's the limit, the world is your oyster. This one I think of a lot, but right, everyone is watching you, don't mess up. So while this is not everybody's experience, and everyone has a very unique experience when it comes to graduation, these are a few things that either I myself experienced during graduation, or that I've heard, friends, or even, just have seen other people respond to. So, well, those are all of the things that we talk about and we hear. I feel like we often don't give enough attention to what graduation also brings. So for everybody, the end of high school brings change and uncertainty. It is you had this same routine a lot. I mean, I grew up, and I went to the same school K through 12. I lived in a very small town, so I knew all of these kids. I was in the 13-year club at my school, so my gosh, I was so sick and tired of these kids, but also I knew them, and so in that, right, I was also an end of, kind of redefining, right, those core relationships. So, friends, peers, teachers, coaches, there's the end of routine and structure that you knew where you were supposed to be. You had a goal set in mind. And when you're getting to that end, right, you're like, I'm not necessarily sure what my next steps are. If you are going on and continuing education, post high school, that does give you a bit more time to kind of, right, adjust before you really jump into the, adult world. But that's hard though, when when you're losing that sense of familiarity. You're really just jumping headfirst into the unknown. So, and similarly, we're also, we see youth that are, struggling to process. I think there can be a lot of shame and confusion, and I mean, a whole host of emotions when you feel like, and every teen, right, feels like they're the only one who's experiencing whatever is going on. So if your teen is not having the Hollywood movie kind of experience of, the excitement of, throwing up your cap and, ready to go right into whatever's next. And if they're struggling in processing what's going on during this time of, celebration and independence and freedom, and oh my gosh, we're just going to be partying and college, and oh my gosh, I'm going to actually make money and I'm going to have a car, whatever it might be, right? I think that this can bring up a lot of emotions, and I think teens feel really isolated if they think that they're the only ones who are feeling that way. So this presentation, understandably, given that it's the Adoptive and Foster Family Coalition, we're specifically talking about the unique experiences, right, and triggers that youth that have been adopted, have spent time in foster care, or have lived in guardianship arrangements might be experiencing on top of all of the, the grief they, the graduation grief that we previously talked about. So all of that, all of those things they might be feeling, have, right, kind of that compounded experience now. So, right, for adoptees, for foster youth, for guardianship youth, this time can really bring up additional, right, conflicting feelings, because there's often this reoccurring theme, right, of how to cope with feelings associated with loss and separation. And that grief, will be carried for, throughout that person's life, and will pop up, I think especially during life transitions. It did for me. That, like, the window between, like senior year of high school, right, till kind of the beginning of college, when I was finally kind of distracted, right, because I was like, okay, I have things that I have to do. That was a tough window, because you just get to kind of sit with your thoughts. But I think these life transitions, whether they be, these are planned, and exciting life transitions, can still, right, bring up some of these memories of past traumas, and can certainly feed into anxieties. And so change in any form, and a lot of you with kids know this, but also transitions just across the board are incredibly difficult. Moving from one task to the other, right? Getting from class to class, so it can be kind of smaller, just changes from activities. And so when you think of big events like graduation, I mean, this is like the ultimate transition. This is something that they've never experienced before. Most likely, obviously, the kids that we know have experienced far more transition and upheaval and everything than most kids, but still, this is a big transition. So change in any form can be extremely challenging for youth who have navigated previous loss and abandonment. So I always encourage parents to be mindful of their child's specific experiences. And so I've just listed a couple here, but to take into consideration as they're navigating these next steps, the times that this child has moved, if they were in, foster care and they, had multiple placements, how long have they been in your care, how and when might memories of relinquishment or separation resurface. And then this one I think of is could packing up of belongings be a particular trigger for your teen? So I think watching out for certain moments, especially within that window. I think of it as like junior year of high school, kind of through till, maybe like the end of the first year of college. I don't know if that's necessarily it. I think obviously it'll, it's different for everybody, but those are some of the windows that I think of. So being aware of that potential, of those experiences and how they might have impacted. And then, feelings of inadequacy as classmates share their next steps and future plans. This is a big one, right? We're always comparing ourselves to others, as much as we know we shouldn't. And I think with the increased access to social media, and I think that brings in an additional level of difficulty, right? Because you're only seeing, what that person wants you to see. So if, you're seeing that they're thriving and, they've immediately, found their best buddy and, or they found their perfect job, kind of right out of, high school. I mean, that's going to immediately make you feel not so great. So if you're not feeling that way, whether that's true, I mean, you never know, but so I think just recognizing that this time really can stir up these feelings of rejection and fears of abandonment and we'll talk a little bit about how to recognize some of the signs of when that and how that may impact, I guess, your relationship with your child, depending on, how they're expressing these emotions and, how these life transitions are storing up memories of past traumas and everything.
Kylie, can I interrupt you for a second?
Yes, please.
That really makes me think about the journey that I've gone through with my kids and with me, my own high school experience. I wasn't that interested in going to graduation. I didn't want to, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
That was one of the few things actually that my mother actually made me go to. And I was incredibly grateful that she did. Yeah. And then I think about how different it was for all of my kids and me. Like, cause two of my kids at least one of my kids got a GED sometime after. And then, of course, I had two other kids who had the whole, more typical graduation and very excited and the future was hopeful and everything was bright. And it just makes me think about, as families, sometimes we forget that the ones who are having a more typical experience, a more successful experience, often that all plays into how we react to the others who may not be having that typical kind of experience. So I love that whole idea of graduation grief and post-graduation depression, because I don't think I've ever heard it put quite like that, but that so speaks to the experience of so many of our children and so many of our families. So I just wanted to point that out.
No, thank you, Chet. I really, really appreciate that. No, I was also really enthusiastic when I came across it. I was like, and again, right, this is unfortunately, this will not be, this will not show up in the DSM-5. This is, there's no specific criteria or diagnostic criteria for it, but it is an experience that a lot of, young adults experience. And I think, we can maybe connect to it because of our own experiences, or we've watched, the children that, are in our lives, as they're kind of navigating this, we might be able to see it, but it's real. And I think, again, when we get the language, I think, to be able to recognize what's going on, I think that's really powerful. So I'm glad that was impactful. So really, really, really wild. So yeah, but you will not find in the DSM-5. But again, also though, to watch out though, because if it is postgraduate depression versus depression, I mean, that's also, to watch out for those signs during that time. So as these experiences are happening, and specifically for the kids that we know, I wanted to provide and this is just a few of the signs. Every youth is, individual, and will be expressing, I guess, like, their process of recognizing that there is going to be this major transition coming up pretty quickly. And some teens, that we're with might have a completely fine time, overall. Like, they might, struggle a bit, but they're, they have their goal in mind, and they are keeping themselves kind of organized, and they have, all of the supports that are needed in order to help them kind of get to, whatever their goal is. But we have, as I was doing some research, I came across three potential manifestations of what happens when you are overwhelmed by this big transition. So first one is paralysis. And so this might show up in youth when they feel like there's an overload of responsibilities, too many options, not certain what the right choice is, a feel of failure, or disappointing others. Now, this was me. I think that this is also important to note that for some of the kids that we know, ADHD diagnoses and executive functioning, I think, also plays a huge role. I mean, overall, just, that we could have a whole conversation about, disability and mental health, and talking about how that impacts, this period in a child's life. And I think we should, but for sake of time, I think I'll try to, fit it in. But I wanted to say though, that ADHD, executive functioning, et cetera, I think also plays a part in some of these. So, right, the overload of responsibilities, too many options. And then, right, we often see this, I think what happens is, specifically with adoptees, but I'm sure it happens as well, but, right, is this feel of failure, or, right, the kind of the sense sometimes of perfectionism, right? You need things to be exactly the way you want them, or you can't. And I think that often is the executive functioning. So the not being able to make the next step. So I always think of this as paralysis. So I mean, I froze. I'm so grateful that I had an adult that was like, okay, like, we're gonna do these things. This is what we have. I'm gonna line it, lay it out for you, and really sat with me the whole process. But there are a lot of youth that don't have that, and so I think of, because without that, I don't know what I would have done. But yeah, but I think it's, so if you're recognizing that the youth in your life is just feels like they have option overload, and they're just not moving, they're very much like frozen and can't make any decisions. I think, yeah, right, like, really keep an eye on that and provide the support that they need in order to make those decisions. So next up, we have denial of comfort. So this is, and as we're talking about this, I'm thinking a lot of also just, right, the attachment patterns, and I'm sure a lot of my staff are like, oh yeah. But so denial of comfort. So this is the expression of, I don't need anybody's help. Like, I can take care of this on my own, right? Like, I'm 18 now. I can't keep asking you to help me. So we might see this in expressions of rage and kind of this pushback, right? Like, kind of like, I've got this, like, leave me alone. Because they're like, I don't, and this, I think, also comes from kids who are, older and haven't had adults that they can trust to help them and lead them into making, these decisions. So they've been like, listen, I've had to do this my whole life. I've been taking care of things on my own. I don't need you. But right, when we're talking about, right, the hidden needs underneath that, I think we also need to make sure, though, that as hard as it is to have a child, right, like, push you away, and hits kind of your own sense of, rejection that might be existing, and your own processing of right, leaving the nest, and your own grief, which we'll get to. But I think, right, like, I think that that's really important to keep an eye out for, and to try to meet those hidden needs, because they're there. They still do need that comfort, that care, to know that, right, like, that your love is unconditional, that you're always going to be there for them. So that's the denial of comfort. So if you feel like that you're getting a lot of pushback, and you're not being let into a lot of, this process, I would check in and see really what's going on, and try to do some of that investigative work. And then third on here is self-sabotage. So when you're getting close to the end here, all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, this is really happening. So we often see teens around this time. So like senior year, usually, sometimes part of junior year, but it's mostly in senior year, where, grades have been pretty consistent, throughout, the beginning, probably like like 3/4 of their, of their high school experience. And then all of a sudden, kind of out of nowhere, they're not showing up for class or exams or commitments that they have. They might be not turning in assignments. They, might be, they might be avoiding, opportunities. They might be acting out, so kind of like getting in trouble that they might not normally have been doing. And so I always think of this as, right, I think it's appropriate, like this sabotage, right, where they're like, I'm going to do what I can to kind of get myself to stay here, or to, whether it be like repeat a year, or just to be again, right, it's trying to take control of the situation that they feel that there's a lack of control in this. So if you're recognizing any of these signs of plummeting grades, unusual behavior that wasn't previously there, that might be a sign that there is self-sabotage happening. And really what's under that is fear, and fear of loss. And so just kind of reframing it in that way. So looking at it as that there needs to be that additional sense of commitment and togetherness, I think can be really helpful in those moments. So those are our 3. There we go. All right, now we're going to turn it on you, the parents. So you're also going through your own grief, your own transition, especially whatever, if you have, if you have 12 kids in your house, if you have 1 kid in your house, this is a big deal. This is a big transition for you. This is, your own grief that you might be experiencing. So first and foremost, I think trying to take emotional inventory, and try to do this even before, you get into senior year. As this, as this process starts to, as you start to get closer and closer to, you're recognizing that, we're getting closer to, graduation. Take emotional inventory, consider your own potential triggers, right? So think about, think about your past, right? We are talking about, how do you feel about your high school experience? What was your relationship with graduation? Was it a positive experience? Was it a negative experience? Did you go? Do you still remember particular statements, positive or negative, that were said to you at this stage? Like what is kind of held on during, especially like your senior year, but also think of even just I would say beginning of senior year to right up to, if it's college, then you're kind of your first day of your first year of college, or the end of graduation into like your first career, armed forces, whatever it might be. So I think kind of keeping that in mind, and we'll do an activity actually in a few minutes about this. And then in the present, be cautious of placing your own dreams or expectations onto your child. This is hard. I know when I've talked to a lot of parents, right, we all are envisioning kind of like we all have our own fantasies, right? We visualize, when we're younger, like the dream house that we're hopefully going to have when we're older. We're dreaming of, if we're looking for a partner, like we're thinking of, what they might look like. So if you go into parenting and, you have all these hopes and dreams and aspirations that, that you're putting all of this, you're bundling it up and you're putting it into your child. You want them to succeed. You want them to do, all the things that, either you did all those positive experiences, or if you're able to look back on that and you're like, I really wish I could have a redo. As well-meaning as that is, I think sometimes that isn't necessarily the most helpful. It can maybe become something that wedges in between you and your child, if not kind of kept in check, I suppose. So I say to be cautious of and to recognize, right, what your dreams or expectations were, and make sure to be aware of, like, is this my child's dream or expectation? Because I worry that sometimes those can kind of rub up against each other. Consider how you feel about your child's post-graduation plan. You might have been set on them going to, your alma mater, and or you want them to kind of follow in your footsteps, or you've recognized that they're really fantastic in really dedicated to art, but maybe that's not necessarily what they want to do. So, or they need to take a gap year, or college just isn't on the table. It's just not something that is going to happen. So I think, right, consider how you feel about that plan. and check in on your emotions and be aware of your feelings around that, and make space to process the change and the loss that you're also undergoing. So I recommend connecting and sharing these feelings with other parents and adults. You can also reach out to a therapist. I mean, not to, but, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, like we have, we have parent support groups here at the coalition. So if you're in a space where you would like to connect with other parents who are navigating kind of a similar situation, this is the perfect place to connect. So yeah, and then monitor your own emotional state will help better equip you to help your teen. So, right, we always have to keep ourselves grounded and aware of what we're feeling in the moment, so that if our child is, emotionally dysregulated, that we're able to, help them come down, or to be, overall just to be their support. So we'll now be going into how can you help? So now that you're able to, you're able to connect with all of these, with all of your feelings, I think it can be really helpful to kind of go through some of these. So how can you help in these moments? So clarify values, right? I think that's a nice opportunity to talk about, and this is a bit of what I talked about earlier, clarifying values. So, whose value is it that, your child graduates high school, goes to college, starts a particular career? Are you still able to truly convey, that love and commitment, if your child's value necessarily align with yours? Be a role model. And this one is specific for, overall, be a role model. But I think when we're talking about the fear of rejection and separation, and, is my leaving the nest, does that mean that, the door is closed? Right? Like, am I still wanted? Am I still, am I still wanted? So I think of being a role model as, show how those relationships look like, show those adult relationships that you have, where you might not live in the same, that you might not live in the same area as one another, but you stay in touch, you, whatever it might be. So I think showing and or explaining what that looks like as your relationship, is changing, I think can be really, really helpful, because that's a really good way for your child to be like, okay, this is what this looks like as we're heading into this new relationship that we have. How does this relationship look like? And what can I expect? Keep a room open. If you're able to, I think try as best as you can. I know that this is different for everybody's situation, but try to keep room open. So if your child is, going away to school, or, is going to be getting their own place, but you're able to keep their room relatively, kind of in the condition that they left it in, obviously, probably vacuumed and cleaned up, because teens are messy, but try to keep a room open to make sure that they know that they're always welcome home. And I think that's a great way to do it, not, to immediately change it into a home office or whatnot. But listen, that's also, if you need that, that's also okay. But I think the keeping the room available, so that every time they come home, they come to the same place and they're like, okay, this is a physical representation that I am still wanted here. There's still room for me at the table. There's still a bedroom for me. Make future plans together. So as you're navigating what that looks like, I think making concrete future plans can be really helpful. Again, it's another acknowledgement that I want to stay in relationship with you. Just because you're going and doing X, Y, or Z doesn't mean that I don't want to stay in contact with you. I don't, and I think, you'd like to think that your child knows that, but in these moments of vulnerability and if you have these feelings that are, kind of being stirred up, I think it's also, sometimes it can get the better of you, right? And make you think things that, aren't something you would be feeling, in another situation. So, so if you make future plans together, I think that's a great way to, to say, consistent, to be like, no, listen, that this is a date. This is, something I want to make sure that we're doing together, because I value our time together. I love spending time with you. And I think that's invaluable. Utilize professional resources. So as you're navigating this time, and depending on what your teen's needs are, either for yourself or for your teen, I think therapy is always fantastic. Support groups for yourself, for your teen. There are a lot of entering adulthood support groups. You'd be surprised. I was doing a lot of research. There's a lot of them, which shows that there's a need, right? So utilize these resources, connect with, or connect with, a mentor for your child. So somebody who has already, maybe a few years older, has already been navigating some of that, and make sure that they have somebody that they can lean on, talk to, who might be in a similar position to them. I think that's a really, really valuable tool. And then this one, I think, is really, really helpful in a similar way to the keeping a room open. Physical objects. This is something that I know one of our staff talked about, the importance of the physical objects, and sometimes the value of items almost feels more real than the value of a person. So in this particular situation, it's when you don't feel like, if your child has experienced so many moves and so much inconsistency, and there's that maybe some of those feelings of that I'm not good enough, or and so they feel like they're disposable, right? But if they're connecting to a physical object that they recognize that you're really in love with, and is really sentimental and really important to you, sometimes that's easier for them to understand that you wouldn't throw away that item. So long story short, anyway, sorry. So I think of the physical objects as being really, really helpful tool as they head out on their own, if they get their own place, or if they're going off just for an interim period of time. I think saying that I made 2 copies of the house key because I just wanted to make sure that you were always able to get in case you lose one, you have 2 copies. Or I bought 2 bottles of your favorite shampoo and put them in the bathroom cupboard. So the idea that you're situated, so whenever you want to come home, there is a space for you, and there is these are physical objects that you can touch and recognize that no, this person wants me to come home. They have these bottles of shampoo, they have my favorite food, they have 2 copies of the house key. And I think that's great, even with your child who's living at home, to make sure that you have items that make them feel like this is where they're meant to be, and this is their safe space, and they're wanted. So the physical objects, I think, are a really great tool to use. And then last but not least, to remain supportive and non-judgmental of your teen's choices. Easier said than done, for sure. But as much as you're able to, I think, I think this can be really, 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 really important to, clarify your own values, and then as much as possible, remain supportive and non-judgmental of your teen's choices, especially if they're not hurting anyone. Kind of the grounding of, this is their life, these are their choices, this is what, they've decided to do. And as much as you're able to, to encourage them on navigating that. Okay, here we get to our activity. So this is going to be a 2-parter. We're going to start now, and then we'll pop in again kind of towards the later part. So I'm going to ask everybody to grab a piece of paper. So whether you're navigating this journey at this time, I still encourage all of you to do it, even if you're a professional in the field and don't have kids. I think it's still valuable. So everybody grab a piece of, it doesn't have to be, but lined paper, and then something to write with. So you're going to take the piece of paper. You take your piece of paper, and you're going to fold it in half, so it makes like a nice little line like that. You don't have to do this right now if you don't have paper, but so you're going to fold it in half, and you're going to make 2 columns. And so in the left column, we're going to call it our emotional dump. So I just encourage everybody to don't think at first. Just write whatever emotions and physical sensations immediately like come to you as you're thinking about graduation, about your child's, kind of entering, adulthood and that transition and everything. Just write them down. Just either, you can set a timer for, 2 minutes or so. There's no right or wrong when it comes to emotions. Be as vulnerable and open as possible. This is just for you. And so just write as much as you can think that you think would be valuable for you. So I don't know if anyone wants to do it right now, but I can send this to anybody who's participating tonight if you want access to it. But yeah, so I think take that time to emotionally dump, right? Get all of your emotions out there, because we need to get our emotions out and to be able to recognize and release before we're able to problem solve, right? Because we go right into problem solve mode, as great as that is, I think we often miss the need of being able to really feel what we're feeling, and just letting that happen without judgment. So that's going to be part 1 of our activity. We'll reconvene towards the end, and I'll tell you what the second part of the activity is. But if you're doing this right now, fantastic. If you are planning on doing it later, also fantastic. I will move us on. So yeah, so left column, just don't think, just write. Okay. So we're going to talk about why I'm emphasizing the inter, not the in. So I'm interdependence, not independence. So the concept of independence is misleading. When we think of graduation, when we think of what comes next, we're always thinking about independence, right? This new like freedom, independence, autonomy, all of these kind of all of these words. And so, but that's misleading, right? Because we shouldn't expect, and really, I mean, you really can't expect 17, 18-year-olds just, to graduate high school and like, okay, good luck, like you're set, you're ready to go. So I think, especially for teens who fear the, being left, and the idea that, when they're independent, that means that, they're expected to, move out and they're on their own and good luck. But that's misleading, because we're not meant to do life alone, right? We still need to recognize our interdependence with other people. So we're all interdependent beings. We have people in our lives, at whatever level we do, for different purposes. And while your independence, might grow as you're getting older, there's still that interdependence that's needed and that will always exist. It might change, but it'll still be there. And so I think that, some of the thoughts that come into your mind and might be, okay, well, once I'm living on my own, will my parents still be there for me? And unfortunately, this is a lot of what comes, what teens will express, is this fear that, this is it. Like, this is, maybe this will be the thing that, will really separate me from the people that have, been such a big part of my life. And so this is a really, really important time of reinforcing the unconditional love, permanency topic, because this is going on, this is unfortunately going to be going, off inside your child's brain. And so, thinking of, I might not be like in charge of you anymore, but I hope that I will always be your best consultant. I'm only a phone call or email away. Again, it's a little formal, consultant, but still being able to say that, no, like I'm always here, really kind of going back to that, being consistent, to being as consistent as possible, building that trust, that all has to continue. And then underscore your reliance on them, without putting pressure that they're expected to come home or expected to, perform certain tasks because, to potentially bring out any guilt. But, like no one else can bake, bread like you. You'll have to come home at least once a month so we can catch up on our show. I think, again, these are other small but really important, things that teens need to hear during this time. They need to know that they're always welcome back, they are wanted back, and that this isn't you saying, I don't want you around. So if we're able to focus on the interdependence and really make sure your child understands interdependence as not independence, I think can be a really, really, really important message for them to hear. And if you're able to consistently, do that throughout your child's life, where you're talking about interdependence, I think this period of their lives will become hopefully a little bit easier, if they know that these things are always and will always be there for them. Okay. So what to do and not do. So again, this is a fun balancing act so of guiding your child towards autonomy while also keeping them safe and supported. So teenagers can be all gas and no brakes. And that's scary, which is why it's so important to keep an open and honest dialogue with them. This is a professor of pediatrics and psychology at Mount Sinai. And so again, as it's hard because your child's also doing this, but as much as you can, try to not compare. Compare, compare your experiences with your child's experience. Compare, your child's comparing with their peers. I think don't compare as much as you can your child's experience with, another child in their, in their grade, because every child is different. And I know that we work and some of the children that you have different, different needs than maybe some of their peers. So their experience is going to be different. They are going to be, navigating things that maybe some of their peers aren't. And that's just how it is. And so I think trying to, as best as you can, to manage, any expectations that you may have, and manage your expectations to meet their capabilities. And try not to set them up to fail. So kind of recognizing, these are the things that my child is capable of doing. These are the that, I recognize that, I might have wanted them to be able to, to do or whatnot, but setting them up for success as much as possible. So making sure that they have all of that support and connection to resources as they're navigating these next steps. And then, recognizing how their past experiences, maturity level, et cetera, is impacting them at this time. So we always talk about, chronological age is different than maybe emotional age. And so to also recognize that, to not expect your child maybe to be able to do other things that 17-year-olds, their age are doing because of their early life experiences, I think can be really helpful. And I realize, I'm sorry, I failed the chat. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Renee, I realized that you said, I also wonder how not feeling good enough impacts on moving on to new experiences, college, job, make it alone. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, again, right, the not feeling good enough, the imposter syndrome, right? I mean, that carries you, I think that carries, yeah, that carries with you throughout so many of your experiences, whether that be, in any area. And unfortunately, I don't think it goes away for a good while. I think I think, regardless of if you've had some of the life experiences that that the kids that we're talking about have experienced, I think we all have imposter syndrome, especially as we're entering the working world. But there's definitely an increased, I think that pops up a lot. Not feeling like you're meant to be where you are, or, always feeling very much like there's a spotlight on you, that everyone's watching you, and waiting for you to fail. And so I think it's so hard to convince, somebody that that's not happening. But yeah, but Renee, you're entirely correct. That's hard. That's hard. And that really does pop up a lot. All right, this is a lot of words here, but so I guess kind of within that, right? So, right, encourage your teen to discover all possible options that they might be interested in pursuing, and then reach out to, I think, right, where teens are, I mean, like middle schoolers, as they're kind of entering their preteen years, teen years. You're not always going to be the person that they want to be talking to you, which is developmentally appropriate, but definitely not fun for you. But if there are, things that they're expressing some interest, or things that you've picked up on that they're interested in, but they might be having a hard time talking to you and being open, or, being vulnerable. I think sometimes it's easier to have them talk to somebody else, but somebody that, that you trust, and that is going to be giving them, good information. So, right, guidance counselors, college, career, vocational counselors, somebody in their field of interest, because again, college might not be that path, might not be the path for that pursuit. So I think focusing in on connecting with outside resources. So some of these supports, as well as, I think I mentioned earlier, mental health providers as well during this big transition period, because a lot of emotions are going to be coming up. And I think it can't hurt to get that started, even at their university, or in the area where they're going to be working, right, to have that foundation set. And then, right, if your teen has any special learning needs, or and we can talk a little bit more about this when we get towards the later part, but finding out what colleges, which colleges can provide the best kinds of supports and accommodations. I think that's valuable, just knowing what's out there, or if they're looking for a specific community, to be able to do the research and know, like, oh, is there a pretty predominant LGBTQ plus, support group, or a community center, or whatever it might be, or club on campus that my child can get connected to. Just being able to help them, if they're not necessarily in that space, to be able to kind of do some of that research for them, but ultimately letting them make these bigger decisions, so that they have this autonomy. Encourage your teen to talk to others who have faced similar challenges. So, right, young adults who are a few years older, their advice might help them as they navigate some of this. So I know it's really helpful if you're able to find somebody in the potential work that you might want to do, or if you're thinking about going to a particular university, if you're able to connect to somebody who's maybe just a year older. There's a lot of advice that you can get from students and from young adults, who are also navigating this or have navigated this recently, and they can give you pretty sound advice. I think especially if you're connecting with people who maybe have had similar life experiences too, because they're going to be talking to you from and explaining things to you that make sense that maybe other young adults might not be experiencing. Encourage your teen and yourself to embrace the notion that college choices and career mistakes are not catastrophic. People transfer schools, take breaks, change career directions all the time. Flexibility is key. Flexibility is so scary. It is so scary for I'm speaking for myself, but I also know, for other adoptees, foster youth, guardianship youth, that's terrifying, flexibility. I'm reading a book right now. It's about being so focused on living, needing for everything to be either black or white. Like, I cannot handle gray. Like, everything needs to be either this or that. And so the idea of flexibility can be really terrifying, but it's an incredibly important tool. So I think if you're able to work on some of that flexibility early on in your child's life, if your child's in your life at that point, working on kind of building that in is really, really important, because otherwise you're like, no, like I'm here. Like, if I've started this job, or if I've committed myself to X, Y, or Z, that's it. I can't move from there. So recognizing and helping them, understand that if your child is going to school and they're not happy with their school, connect them to somebody who maybe didn't have a great experience at that school, and talk to them about how that transfer experience was. It hopefully will help normalize that, and take the shame and the guilt and whatever might also be popping up for that. And then older teens may be more open to counseling than in previous years, because they're now a bit older, and they're maybe a little bit more aware of some of the needs that they have. So, consider therapy, academic or life coaching to help decision make about what to do after high school or through those transition years. And also after they, have their kind of first career or college experience, to help them also kind of bridge that gap, because no one knows what they want to do at that time. And then this is the second part of our activity. So what I would then encourage you all to do is to take a minimum of 5 minutes to get up and walk around before returning to your paper. I think even returning a little bit later. So, because sometimes when we're raw, problem solving isn't productive or beneficial. So letting some of that sit for a little while, I think is really helpful. So after you've done your emotional dump and you've let out all of these feelings, and your hopes, your dreams, your own grief, and your own processing of your past experiences, and now your own kind of separation and new change of the relationship that you have with your child. I think let that all be on there. You might need a couple pieces of paper, but you've got time. And then I think when you're ready, and when you're really ready, return to your paper, and then in that right column, write ideas for things that you can do to feel more at peace with what you listed in your emotional inventory. So try to come up with some action steps. So some things that you can do whenever grief bubbles up. And so that's I think that's really helpful for you to be able to have those. And this again kind of goes into self-care as well. So to have things kind of set up and organized for you so that you know what you're supposed to do in those moments. When you feel like you're having some of this grief kind of resurface, what can you do for yourself so that you're meeting your emotional needs? And then I have a kind reminder that as the parent, this is your responsibility to meet your own grief needs. I think it's really important, and there's a time and a place to be bringing in your experiences of grief and with your child. And I think it can be really helpful to have some of those conversations, but it's such a delicate line to make sure that your grieving and your own experiences don't flow into your child's fears and anxieties and guilt of leaving home and whatever else might be going on in their mind. So I think trying to keep, I guess, to keep aware of what the goal is there. And find supportive adults to speak with, and people who get it, and people who know you and are maybe also going through this at the same stage. So shout out to the, I don't know if this is what you guys actually talk about in your group, but the Saturday morning group happens to be a group, right, of mostly parents of older teens, so kind of, or young adults who are, so might be in this kind of area. So that could be maybe a helpful group to be a part of. And that's it. Thank you so much for being here. And then I will send out, we can talk also. I wanted to give time for any questions before, before we ended. So I wanted to give time for Q&A, and then I'm happy to share any resources or answer any questions about some of those next steps, especially when it comes to post-secondary education and supports and scholarships, et cetera, that might be available. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and but thank you so much for listening to me ramble for the last hour or so. I really appreciate it.
Fabulous job.
Yeah, it was very helpful, Kylie, in a lot of different ways, helping us think back on the impact that our own experience has, and the fact that our households are made up of so many different experiences, where we have kids doing super well and kids not doing so well, and all kinds of things. That was a really, really, really concrete way of looking at that whole experience. I really appreciate that.
So much. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Totally agree. Chester, Charlie, that was wonderful. Definitely helped me when I had last year. Actually, it was more like this year around May, June. I definitely have families that called and was like, my son was doing well, my daughter was doing well, and what's going on? I just never thought about the grief and loss. So that was very helpful. At least now I'm educated enough to say, listen, there's a video. She explained it greatly, and I could. But it's just amazing, because I remember going through this for myself when I was leaving college. It should be a happy time, but I can't even imagine compounded more with our kids who are from who are in trauma, stuff like that. But this was definitely, thank you, totally appreciate it. Definitely something that's helpful to me to help my families.
Oh, I'm so glad. No, that's the goal. That's the goal. Ooh, thank you, Renee. Yeah. So can you touch on the impact on siblings when there's, when their sibling moves out? Absolutely. So that's a really hard transition as well. For the student that's, or for the young person that's, either going to college or no, completely understandable, Renee, don't worry. Yes. So I think, so I have a younger brother, so he, I can speak to this from a personal standpoint. But that's a really hard, experience, because one, the older sibling is having, it's have that separation, right? They're going off and they're doing this really big thing, and it's really hard. And they're also grieving, right? The separation also from the other members of the house. It's not just, parent or parents or guardian. It can also be, right, other members of the house. But I think, right, completely, we need to also recognize that there are often other kids in the house, and they're also going through their own grief. They're going through their own, navigating transition. And so I know for my brother, it was really, really tough. I mean, he definitely benefited a little bit, right? Because he got to, choose if he wanted to sleep in my bed or if he wanted to sleep in his bed, because he now had 2 bedrooms. But, I think that's a huge separation. That's a big loss. Being able to, know that your yeah, that you have, that your sibling is going to be there, like when I get home from school or whatnot, just having that kind of familiar face, and that's a big deal. I know, I'm trying to think. Try to think of like my specific situation, but also from the situations that I've heard of. But I think then, depending on like the adults in the house, like their processing, I think sometimes the kids in the house, some of their needs can also get kind of not meaning to, but can sometimes get pushed aside, and then they're experiencing their own, preparation for their kind of, getting ready for their potential, graduation from high school, and what does that look like? And I think in some ways, right, it's helpful because they've seen somebody go before them, but in other ways, now they're the one that has all the attention on them.
Yeah. I
know for my brother, he hated it more than anything, and and I personally experienced a lot of guilt because he was then the only, it was because my mom's a single mom and he's the only, it's just my brother and I. So then it was, my brother had all the attention on him. And that was really, really tough for him. So I had my situations unique, but I would try to come home as much as I could to kind of like give him some space. But yeah, I think there was a lot of guilt there on my part because I was leaving him, but again, right, kind of conflicted because I'm also, this is what I'm supposed to do, right? Like this is me doing what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to be going out and but it's complex. It really, really is, and I think it's something that we definitely need to be paying more attention to. And I appreciate you bringing this up because this is something that I want to make sure when I bring this topic up again, that I also make sure to address that. So I appreciate the question. So I don't know if anybody has anything they want to, if this is something that this topic resonates with them and wants to add anything, but yeah, but all the attention gets put on how do you support a child who's struggling to find their way without steering them? And please, anybody can also chime in. This is the, I have, that's also a lot to have everybody kind of in that same phase at the same time. That's a lot because again, you're always comparing, right? Like unfortunately, that's what you're always doing with your siblings. Everybody's always comparing themselves, especially with one another. So there's always going to be a little bit of sibling, competitiveness and, and right. We kind of think about, everybody has like their kind of like their role, and it's like, oh my God, older sibling, sibling, younger sibling, whatever it might be, we kind of know what that, we have our own ideas of what that might look like, but to be able to support, to be able to support a child who's struggling to figure out what they want to do without steering them. I know from what I've read and I've seen from a lot of from many experts is that it's so hard because as a parent, right, like your immediate go-to is I want to problem solve. Like I want to like you jump right in there, like you're ready to like go and call everybody and knock on everyone's door to make sure that you get your kid whatever they need, right? But this is such a like crazy time because right, your young person's like in this like very weird middle area where they're like they don't want your help, and they're like developmentally like supposed to be pushing right away from the nest and especially from their parent, but also right, but they're also more than ever probably they need you, and they need you in a way that they don't necessarily know how to express. So I think that's where it becomes really, really messy. So if you're trying to help your child who's having a hard time figuring out what they want, I think I don't know necessarily, but I think providing them, I think avoiding trying to problem solve and give them the answers. I feel like I would encourage connection to like opportunities, I suppose, to explore different options. So whether that be, oh, you might be interested in this, you love animals. So maybe kind of encouraging without doing the work for them, but encourage some of that exploration. I mean, it depends, right? If there's other things going on as far as, I'm specifically thinking of executive functioning, but there's a lot of other things that are going on. But I think being able to be there and support, but also allow for your child to make those decisions and make those potential mistakes on their own.
And Kylie, what the other piece of it is, in several of your other slides, you talked about parents being incredibly, I don't even know what the word is, but incredibly involved in helping our children through this transition. So if you're doing half of those things, a handful of those things, then you're hopefully going to be in tune enough to help each individual child in terms of what they need. The kid who's not going to college, the kid who's just going to go out and work at Target, you can still help them be excited about that, or help them figure out why this transition seems to be so difficult. I always like to come back to what we can do as parents. Sometimes the most helpful thing we can do is figure out where we are in this whole mix. Like, because that's talk about transitions, right? You're going from being super mom to now being super mom and everybody's gone. So probably the biggest thing that's happening in that house is you redefining where you're going to be. So I mean, I think you covered a lot of it really in the slides. And if you're doing any pieces of those things, you're going to touch on a lot of what needs to happen with those other transitions. I see there's another question in the chat. So
we should move into the supportive mode, not decision-making role. Yeah, not to compare and allow each child their own journey. Yeah, whatever you do, I'll be cheering you on. Yep, absolutely. Mm-hmm. I also think that in a COVID world, that happens after graduate. Yeah, that happens after graduation. It's different. New grad this year has been stuck at home most of the past 3 school years. So now, thrust into the real world. And so, we've had to slow down our expectations. Yeah, absolutely. Spot on. Exactly. I mean, the experiences experiences have changed significantly. And then I also think, I was looking at statistics, and it was, really fun stuff, right? That what's going on with inflation, and that more and more, more and more, like, students that are, young adults are really kind of put in a position where they kind of have to stay home, or, because rent is just so high, and, so it's messy, but the structure and the expectations that existed, even a few years ago are changing. And then we also have COVID, and that changed so many things. And so I appreciate you bringing up, that up, because that absolutely, that absolutely changes a lot. And the real world is overwhelming in and of itself. But if you have then, the real world post COVID, I think that's an entirely different situation. Yeah, it can be complicated by special learning needs, delayed development, and social emotional health needs. Overwhelmed by too many opportunities.
That's a good problem, man.
It is, but it's also, again, like, right, it's opportunity overload. I always think, I think of it as just like on a different scale, but you walk into like a grocery store or wherever, like a pharmacy, and you're like, I just need some toothpaste, or I need a new toothbrush. you're there for like 5 hours looking at everyone, and there's too much information. They all look the same. They all look different, but so that's it. That's it, right? Like what, if you have too many options, I think that's almost, I don't even know. I feel like it's almost just as hard as not having any option. That might not be everybody's experience, but that's how I feel. So yeah, overwhelmed by too many opportunities, because then you're like, okay, well, I think this is what I want to do, and it's already stressful enough trying to figure out what you want to do is. Yeah. Oh, I'm glad you like the toothbrush, but it's true. That's like deeply overwhelming. Like I'm like, the thing is, I'm a creature of habit. If I've picked my like items, I will not move from there. That's it. That's the toothbrush I'm going to be buying for the rest of my life, probably. And I think, I wish I could fit all of this in this presentation, and I would love the opportunity to kind of come back, or even have somebody else on our staff come back and talk about this and bring in more components of how does mental health, how does specific learning needs, delayed development, social emotional health needs that you were talking about, how does that impact this process? Because that, again, right, so it's like, right, and then it's like adoption, your experiences, attachment, loss, and then it's like this additional level of when there's like a mental health need, when there's that changes so much of it. The access to supports and what you need to do, and specific laws that you need to you would want to be aware of in order to provide the best support for your child as they're getting older. They need to potentially have support as they navigate independent living. So there's so much information out there, and I would love to be able to touch on that topic, because I think a lot of you might be looking for that information, or might be interested in that, and I would love to be able to bring that to the group. And then I see job 3 of the past 3 months, because overwhelmed by all of the jobs they were doing, because of less human contact, and also growing up in a shut down world. Yep. Started social engagement difficulties, and COVID isolation made it much worse. And now they have to be open to the job. Yep. Yeah. And that's so difficult. I think we've seen kind of we've seen more jobs become available that are remote. I'm not necessarily pushing people into that, but like a lot of people are realizing how successful remote work can be. I don't know if that's necessarily the route that anyone wants to go, but I mean, there are a lot of remote positions, or even hybrid positions that are available. So if you go for kind of a hybrid model, that might also be a really nice way to slowly transition into, maybe at some point, that person would want to go, fully in person, but it's just an option. It's just an idea. But there are a lot of remote positions still. But you don't also want your child to be isolated, at home, and so right. It's a balance, but I think for it does meet the needs of especially our introverts, who definitely could benefit, or if you have specific, like if you have very bad social anxiety, I think there's a lot of benefit that having the option to look for remote work can bring. So, but it still doesn't answer the question, though, or address, how can we support, young adults who are entering the working world and are going to be in person, and how to help with, overstimulation and, and just the exhaustion, right, as they get back and from their job, and they're just beat. So again, I appreciate you bringing this topic up as well. Yeah, 3 in 3 months, that's so tough. And that's also like, that's a lot of jumping back and forth. But I mean, right, like kind of kudos for, really pushing through and kind of continuing to try again, right? That's also not easy. Yep, many have educational accommodations and then enter the workforce without the supports. And then they don't feel able to ask for accommodations on the job and then don't have success. Yep. Well, again, right, also there's a lot of shame. I mean, I remember, so I had a 504 plan. And I had the option so this is different from job, but I had the option, right, to tell my university that I had a 504 plan, because it's up to you to be able to bring, any of that to your universities, ours was called the Disability Resource Center. So that if I needed, right, like additional time or anything or whatever they were going to be able to offer me, that could be put in place. We could go into a whole bit on that, but I was I had too much shame, and I was like, I wish I didn't necessarily do that, because I think it could have been really helpful. But you put these young people in a really tough position where they're expected to be vulnerable and to put that out there, and then you're also worried, is that going to cost me a job necessarily? If I legally I don't think it can, but right, but I think it becomes really difficult. Yeah, when you're not necessarily given that, or it's just not an environment where, the educational accommodations that existed previously, just don't exist or aren't. I don't know what the situation would be that they weren't, available, but yeah, but then of course, they needed those supports for a reason, right? So yeah, they're really just being set up to not succeed and to have a much harder situation, than they need to, which again might also play a role in the kind of constant right changing of careers or different opportunities, because it's overwhelming. You're not getting the support that you need, so it's also frustrating. I can't imagine from a parent standpoint how frustrating that must be, to also not want to immediately go in there and be like, no, like this is what my child needs, but also recognizing that they're an adult and like I need to take a step back, blah, blah, blah. But that's so frustrating, and I feel for you all as you're being that support system for your young adults. That's hard.
It is.
Also not feeling worthy of job/college success, and thus, yeah, don't ask for accommodation. That's a big thing. I mean, that's a huge topic, right? I mean, I have quite a few friends that, had either, IEPs or 504 plans, when they were in school, and then come college, they're like, nope. But the thing is that need didn't leave, right, when they finished high school and in college or whatever else they're, going into next, it's probably harder than what high school, had to offer. So more than anything, they would need, would benefit from having that support. So I wish that there was a better system put in place to make it, to lessen the shame and, overall just to make it easier, because I know a lot of it then falls on the student to be the one that's voicing, their needs multiple times sometimes to make sure that they're getting, the accommodations that they need. I'm specifically talking about, university, but that's a lot to ask for students who, have had, or if you're thinking about just shame, but also, who have accommodations for, because they have ADHD or they really struggle with, they have a mood disorder, and so it's really difficult for them to, when they've crashed and they're in, their lowest point, to know that their teachers are aware of this and that, they're getting the kind of support that they need. So I think that there's just not enough connection to the resources that are on campus, specifically, because so much of it falls into the responsibility of the young person to voice their need. And I mean, we know teenagers, we know young adults. That's rarely going to happen. So
Yeah.
just because we're setting people up for failure. I realize it's almost 8:30. I think that's when we stop, right? Around 8:30. Right? Is that when we start? 8:30? Is that correct? I think so. I'm not kicking anybody off also. I mean, I'm happy to stay on. It's so hard as a parent to stop advocating for your child. At the age of 18, we as parents lose our place at the table. It's terrifying and frustrating, particularly when a young person isn't ready to advocate for themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
Again, right, that's also like a loss of control, right? And you know, that's a loss of control for parents, right? Where you were previously able to, you know, I mean, even we're talking about like medical decisions, right? Then that's, you know, you don't necessarily have that ability to be making medical decisions unless, you know, your young person signs, you know, the paperwork. But I mean, there's so much to it. I think that you have to, you're put in a position where you have to, you know, step outside of, you know, having that control to be able to make those decisions and to, because you're able to feel like, listen, I know what my child needs. You know, I've known them for X amount of years, you know, and yeah, I can't imagine how frustrating that is, because as I look back on my own experience, like I wish so badly that I, you know, like there are so many things that I'm like, oh, this would have been a completely different experience had I, you know, done X, Y, or Z. But also, I also have to recognize that I was 18. I didn't know what I was doing. Yeah. I did exactly what probably most 18-year-olds would do, you know, which is, right, like not bring the paperwork that they needed to bring and, you know, get all of that put together so that they had all the support that they needed. And then, you know, was too ashamed to, you know, mention that they were having a hard time to their professor, and then just, you know, didn't hand in assignments because they weren't the way that they wanted it to be. I mean, this is my personal experience. Like if my essay wasn't exactly what I wanted it to be, I wasn't handing that in. Right. Nope.
Right.
Nope. But then again, right? Like I was an A student when I handed my work in on time. But when you don't hand your work in on time, you lose points. So it's comical at this point, but oh my God.
Yeah. But and thankfully you were able to fight through that and continue to go on and do what you needed to do to get your degree. A lot of kids, they run into some challenge, some difficulty, and then they're just bailing. They're just bailing. And then we as the parents will sit there and we're watching them bail because there's really nothing we can do about it. You know, it's incredibly frustrating. But part of the process, I guess.
Yeah. It's so frustrating. So frustrating. You know, I see it with, with somebody that I'm close with, who has a very similar like lived experience as me. Didn't finish college because very much, you know, like ran into that, you know, that wall and was just like, I can't do it. I can't do it anymore. Ran out of steam and didn't have the right supports and was struggling, and, you know, with mental health, with, you know, self-esteem, with everything that goes on, you know, at that developmental stage. Plus, right, you've got adoption, plus you've got mental health, plus, you know, like there's so much, I think that again, on top just becomes more and more, just becomes a much, you know, such a difficult obstacle, you know, course to navigate.
Yep.
So I feel like we're ending on a bit of a sour note, but
well, just a realistic observation of the fact that that's the nature of it. We want them to go, and sometimes that means they're going to go not as prepared as we'd like them to be. But that's just the reality. That's the nature of the beast. Exactly. But that's why it's a good thing we're still there.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? Consistency, you know, that you're there and that, you know, that your interest is in their success, and that you're, you know, as much as you're able to, you know, without, you know, taking away their need for autonomy and control and everything, trying to, you know, offer that that guidance is key. And there's no such thing as also you know, dominating the chat. This was very helpful because I think this was the questions and comments that you were making, and they were really, really helpful, and added a lot to the space. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Good job. I agree. That's very helpful.
But as with everything, there is hope. There's positive, there's a lot of positives that we can look at with this. That you are there, that you are, in their corner, on their side, as Katie likes to say. And that, please reach out to us. We have a, specific spot on our website. Completely blanking on what it is right now. But if you type in, preparing for college, AFFCNY, preparing for college, or scholarships, I believe, you'll be brought to a page where there's something you can download specifically, which this is college specific, but it's also preparing your child for, kind of that transition to adulthood. But those are resources specifically for youth who have been adopted, who have spent time in foster care or living in guardianship arrangements, and what's available for them financially, and also support, academic support, et cetera, that exists that you probably don't know about, because I didn't know about it until I researched it. So please feel free to do that search, and also to reach out to me. That's my email, just pops in the chat. But please feel free to reach out to me if you need anything in the meantime. Thank you for all your questions, for listening to me, babble for the past hour and a half. I really appreciate it. And thank you all so much. But unless there are other questions or anything, please let me know. I don't want to kick anyone off, and if there's another question or comment.
I just want to say again, thank you, Kylie. I really enjoyed it. And it's very useful. Very useful. We're going to get the slides now, or are we going to get?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to send them. My gosh, I feel like I need to clean them up a little bit, but they're.
Oh, that was great.
I'm happy to share them. Yeah, absolutely. Would that be helpful for everybody? I can totally share those.
Okay.
I know who attended tonight, so I can send like a PDF copy of them or something.
That'd be great. That'd be great.
Of course. Well, thank you all so much for popping in. I appreciate it.
All right. See you guys. Have a good night.
Great evening.
Good night.